morning. Welcome also to everyone who's joining us online. Good to be with you as well. We're in part 2 of this series called A Woman Named Friend. It's about Ruth, who has the whole book of the Bible named after her. And our series is about the influence of friendships. Her name literally means friend. The influence of friendships, of relationships. And what I realized this week, that the really important relationships to God are intergenerational relationships. All friendships, all relationships are important, but the relationships from one generation to another, those are of great importance throughout the scriptures. I realized as I was reflecting on it. And because, see, it doesn't come natural to us, though, because we all live in the me generation, if you catch my drift, that, you know, we got a fallen nature, and we're all about ourselves and what is convenient for us. And so to invest in someone else, giving time and trouble sometimes is not easy for us to do. And for instance, like Ruth, she was dedicated to her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law was a widow. Ruth was a widow. Her mother-in-law was in a foreign country. She determines to go back to Bethlehem, where she's from, but she's as nothing. She's bereft. She's lost her husband. She's lost her 2 sons. I mean, triple grief and bereavement she's experiencing. Plus, she's lost her source of income, because in that culture, that's how it happened, through the men. And so Ruth says, "You're not going to go there alone. You're not going to go and be alone. I'm going with you, because you need some support and some help." And so that was a big cost to Ruth to do that. I mean, she was leaving her. She could have stayed home in Moab, where they were. She could have found a husband. He was young, attractive, marriageable, and started a family. But she is dedicated to her mother-in-law, so she goes with her. Intergenerational friendships and relationships. And some of you are doing that same thing now. I mean, I know, friends, that you're taking care of elderly parents. You know, you're trying to make sure they have adequate housing, adequate medical care, and that cuts into some of your time and emotional energy of doing things you'd like to do. But it's so valuable. I mean, you're paying it back, basically, right? For repaying what they did for you. And that is so valuable. My parents died young, so we never really did that, my siblings and I, but in my wife's family, Colleen's family, her parents, they lived to 90, each of them, and, they were farmers, they were stout, but when her dad was about 80-something, I mean, he had a pretty serious thing that landed him in the hospital, and I was with them in the hospital room, and I sensed the love that they were showing to him. That was so, I could just sense the healing that was taking place in him because of that devotion of of his daughters and son, and so that's valuable. In my case, my intergenerational relationship is paying it forward. Not just my children, but my grandchildren. And so Mondays are my day off. So Mondays have become, for Colleen and me, Grandchildren Day. Or more specifically this year, because the 3 oldest are in school on Mondays, it's Granddaughter Day. And Dahlia, that's our granddaughter. And see, sometimes, because Colleen has been substitute teaching, it's just Dahlia and me. And I took that picture of her when we had just eaten a lot of blackberries. I don't know if you can see the wonderful mustache she has there. But, I got to be honest, that's something that I'm not a natural at, of being a grandfather, because, I get antsy, and I think of the things I could be doing. I could be looking at my phone and checking my email every 5 minutes and getting caught up in Twitter and having a longer workout on that. But so some things, that's all selfishness, right? But so some things I do get a little antsy about, like playing restaurant. To play in a restaurant for an hour, 90 minutes, it's not my thing. I mean, if the food were real, I probably would like it more. But so I have to learn to do that. And then another thing, I'm not too good at nap time, because what we do is I get my granddaughter down on the bed and lay down next to her and read a book, and it's supposed to help her fall asleep. Well, it works, but for the wrong person. So we have a little video I want to show you.
Mother held her new baby and very slowly rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, holding him.
That's what happens. But generational relationships, intergenerational relationships, those are of huge, huge importance to the kingdom of God. That's why the Bible contains genealogies that we all want to fast forward through, like in Genesis or First Chronicles or Matthew chapter 1 or Luke chapter 3. But the interrelationship of generations is so important to God because that's where so much of his blessing comes. He works through one generation to another in imparting blessing, and it goes both ways, forward and backward. And so Deuteronomy 7 verse 9 talks about that, and it says, know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps his covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. But now listen to this, the flip side of it. If we don't love him, if we don't keep his commandments, it says, he repays to their face those who hate him by destroying them. He will not be slack with one who hates him. He will repay him to his face. I mean, that's a sobering word to us there. Because last week we looked at Exodus 34:7, when the Lord was describing, verse 6 anyways it is, but was describing himself to Moses. And I'm going to read verse 7 along with it. But he says there, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. I mean, that's the other side of this equation. There's a potential for great, great blessing that will last 1,000 generations. But there's also the potential for, if we do it wrong, if we blow off God, ignore his ways, for harm and damage that goes generationally as well. So generations are intergenerational relationships is what we're talking about today. And so in this series, like we just reviewed from last week too, we talked about the difference between impact and influence. We Christians, we want to change the world, right? We see when the world is broken and want to change it. And plus, we're called to do that. We're the salt of the earth. We're the light of the world. And so we want to change the world, but we don't want to go to the idol of impact, which is what the world wants. The world wants impact. Impact, as this little formula shows, impact, I is impact equals a large amount of force over a short period of time. We would love to change the world quickly. But what the disciples wanted that too. When Jesus came, they wanted him they thought his kingdom was an earthly kingdom, that he would kick out the Roman occupiers of the land not right away and would restore the independence of the nation and set up the kingdom, restore the kingdom of David. And they didn't like it when he talked about suffering and being crucified and being buried in that. And we can be like that too, and we think that we want the big impact things now. And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount mentioned about some people who had some ministry things, gifts, and actions that were pretty impactful but not good. He said this in Matthew 7. He says, verse 22, on that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Impact isn't the biggest thing, isn't the most important thing. And another example of that is 1 Corinthians 13. There when Paul, in the famous love chapter, he contrasts some things, some pretty impressive gifts or ministries that take place, but they pale in comparison to something else. Tongues of men and of angels without love. That's like just a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Or you can, prophetic powers, understanding all mysteries and knowledge and having mountain-moving faith. But without love, it's nothing. Or you can be the world's greatest philanthropist and be a martyr, give away everything you have, and give your life. But if you don't have love, it counts for diddly squat. It's not that impact is all bad. I mean, we look at the Bible, and we see that there are some people that had some things that were quite impactful. When Moses brought the plagues to Egypt, or parted the waters of the Red Sea, that had impact. Or when David slew Goliath, or when Elijah called on the fire from heaven to consume the offering on the altar, or when Peter preached one sermon, and 3,000 people came to faith in Jesus at that moment. Those are impact, to be sure. But impact isn't where most of us live, right? I mean, we're ordinary, garden variety Christians. But God can use us too, not through impact necessarily, but in another way. You see, Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, in the Beatitudes, he didn't say, "Blessed are the movers and shakers, for they will rule the world." He said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." I want to talk about influence then. Just a reminder, influence is a small amount of force that's brought to bear over a long period of time. And that F for force really is for friendship, is a small amount of friendship, or a personal friendship over a long period of time. See, that's the way God grows his kingdom. Jesus talked about that. We looked at last week, the parable of the mustard seed. And that seed, smallest of all seeds, gets planted in the ground. It's invisible, and then it grows slowly. And someday, eventually, it becomes a large tree that the birds of the air can nest in. God works at the speed of seed. I wish it were faster. In fact, in my backyard, we lost a tree last summer. It was a big tree. The drought, and it was old and stuff. And so it got chopped down. Well, a couple weeks ago, some of my loyal friends from Bros Brew and Bible came and helped me remove it from the yard. And I wish it, the problem is now we've lost about 75% of the shade in our backyard. I wish trees grow faster, but they don't. That's the way it is with love and relationships and influence too. They grow over time. So Ruth, let's come back to the story of Ruth. We talked about how she went back to Bethlehem with Naomi, just the two of them. And then, they have no income. So Ruth goes out to glean barley in a barley field there and picking up what's left behind. And turns out she's in the field of Boaz. And that was, Boaz takes very kindly to her because because he knows what she did. He knows that Naomi returned without her husband, without her sons, but that she came along with to be a support, a loyal, devoted daughter-in-law. So he takes good care of Ruth and Naomi. And so this intergenerational friendship thing, it gets reciprocated. So in chapter 3 of Ruth, Naomi says to Ruth, she says, "My daughter, should I not help you find a home for yourself?" She's young, marriageable, and that. And so, and she says, no, Boaz, he's single. I'm paraphrasing the story. You can read it in your own bit. He's single, and he's a generous man, and he's been kind to us. Here's what I want you to do. So this was a custom. Then it sounds kind of strange to us, perhaps, but she said, get yourself washed, gussied up, perfumed. And I want you to go to the threshing floor where Boaz is, because they finished their harvesting and they had a celebration, and so he'll be by his pile of barley sleeping then. And I want you to go there and uncover his feet and lay at his feet. And so that is what she does. And we read in chapter 3, verse 8, at midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. I can picture how startled he was, because I want to tell you a story here. It has to do with former lead pastor Dan Feldkamp, who was a total jokester, and Wade Anderson, who we hired on our staff as in worship and music about 2013. Wade couldn't find a home in Cannon Falls right away, so he was staying with Dan and Betsy in their home. They had a unfinished basement. They had a sofa sleeper down there, and so Wade slept there until they found a place. And so Wade related to me that one morning he woke up and he said, "There's somebody else in this bed." And he rolled over and turned, and there was Pastor Dan laying next to him, and he said, "Hello, sunshine." That must be a little bit of how Boaz felt, because he was shocked. Ruth says, "Spread your garment over me, and be my kinsman redeemer." And that kinsman redeemer, remember, that's an important role that in Israelite society was played by the nearest male to a deceased man to make sure the estate stayed in the family. They either, if they had sold it because they were poor and needed the money, to buy it back, to bring it back to the family, or if they needed to sell it because they needed to arrange for a fair price. And then also if there were if there wasn't a son, an heir, then that kinsman redeemer was responsible to go and raise up an heir for his deceased. So then there would be the land and property would stay in the family. So he says, "Listen, I'm willing to do that, but one catch we got to take care of first. There's another male relative who's closer to the late Elimelech than I am. He has first dibs at the estate, and so I will meet with him as soon as I can, and we'll see if he wants to do it. If he wants to, he gets it. Otherwise, by all means, I will marry you, and I will be the redeemer for the family of Elimelech, the late Elimelech." So the next day, he goes to the town city gates, and the city gates at the town were like a meeting place and a courtroom. And so eventually that other relative comes along, and Boaz tells him, "The estate of Elimelech is available. Do you want to redeem it?" And he says, "Yes, I will redeem it." And then he puts on the catch that in so doing, you're going to inherit the wife of Mahlon, the late son, and it'll be your responsibility to raise up a male heir offspring for them. And then the guy declines it. "I can't do it because it'll endanger my own estate." So Boaz says, "Well, then I will do it." And so there's a bunch of people gathered there, and I'm going to read from chapter 4 here, because it's I like what Bethany read. Ruth has some beautiful accounts here. So this is in verse 11 of chapter 4. "All the people who were at the gate and the elders said, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Paurus, whom Tamar bore to Judah.'" Now, flag those names because we're going to come back to them. "Paurus, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life, and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood said, a son has been, the woman of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So this is such a wonderful, happy ending here. But it's win-win-win, right? I mean, Naomi gets her estate, gets provision for her. She gets a grandson too. And Boaz and Ruth get each other. But it's much more than that. It's more than just a Hallmark Channel love story. Because what Ruth does really becomes a hinge in Israelite history. Because we want to go back to Judah here. Judah was one of the patriarchs. He was one of the 12 sons of Joseph. And he was the one who was really the leader among his brothers. But he wasn't always a good guy. And he had a son named And when he got married in age, he got a wife for him whose name was Tamar. Okay, so and Tamar are married. And it doesn't say why, but it says was wicked before the Lord, so the Lord slew him. So is dead. So he gives Tamar to his next oldest son, Onan, and Onan is responsible then to raise up the heir for his late brother. But Onan doesn't want to do that. See, because he knows that the son won't be his, and I'm reading between the lines, but I suppose he thinks, well, then I might not get all the inheritance, because right now I'm the oldest. I wouldn't get the lion's share of the inheritance, because I'm not the oldest. But so every time they came together, he withdrew. So that was wicked in the eyes of the Lord, and he also was slain. So Judah says to Tamar, okay, I got one more son. Shelah is his name. He's younger. Wait till he grows up, and then I'll give him to you, and he'll be your husband. But he's not going to do that, because this woman has been bad luck. His first two husbands died being married to her. He's not going to risk his last son on her, so that he doesn't give her to her. And then Shelah grows up, and Tamar then realizes he's not going to keep his promise. He's not doing what he said he would do, and he's not obeying the law to help have an offspring, have a male heir. And so she takes matters into her own hands, and she dresses herself up as a prostitute, goes to sit by the road near a town where Judah would frequent. And sure enough, Judah comes by, and Judah propositions her. And so they have intercourse, and Tamar is pregnant. And then in what is probably the most biggest example of hypocrisy in the Bible, when it's reported that Tamar is pregnant through prostitution, Judah says, bring her up and let's burn her alive. Well, that doesn't happen, because Tamar proves to Judah that this is your child, this is your son that I'm carrying, or these children. And so Tamar gives birth to twins, actually, Perez and Zerah. Well, so that set a stain upon Israel, this generational thing. I mean, that affected. Judah was the leader. But you see what happened after them after the conquest during the period of Judges. Israel was in bad shape. Everyone did was right in their own eyes. It was a moral. They lost their moral compass. And so, but what Ruth does, and Ruth and Boaz, is it's a hinge. It to a degree reverses that curse that was set in motion generations earlier, because they do it right. He follows through on his commitment to his relative, and so they have this son Obed, and Obed is the father of Jesse. Jesse is the father of David, the King David. And it was under David, a man after God's own heart, likewise not perfect, but David, who helped Israel to become the kingdom and become a blessed nation. What Ruth did was the hinge of Israelite history. And more than that, it was the hinge of human history as well, really, to a large degree. Because Ruth, though many generations separated, Ruth is the grandmother of Jesus. And Jesus, if Boaz was the redeemer there for Israel, Jesus is our redeemer, as it says in Titus 2. Jesus, gave himself for us to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. He's our redeemer. Now, because of what Ruth did, because she was faithful, that blessing continues generations later. So the generations, intergenerational relationships, those are so important to God. Paying it back, paying it forward. 1,000 generations of blessing can come when we do it right. The damage of doing it wrong can go 3 to 4 generations, it says. There's a verse in Isaiah 58:12 that I've prayed for myself and I pray for my children, and I suggest you could pray for it too, for yours. It says, "You shall raise up the foundation of many generations." We got to think long term. When we visited Paris 6 years ago, went to the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is an incredible structure. You know, it took 200 years to build it. It was built by volunteer labor. These people, after work, or they did it when they weren't working, but they built this cathedral. They weren't building it for themselves. They were building it just to see their own children baptized there and or to sing in the children's choir or whatever. They weren't building it for their children. They weren't building it for their children's children. They weren't building it for their great-grandchildren. It took like 6, 7 generations, 200 years for that to be finished. They had the future in mind as well. And we need to realize the intergenerational dimension to our current relationships. Sarah Groves, who is she's from Minnesota, lives in St. Paul. She wrote a song called Generations. And the refrain goes like this. It says, "Remind me of this in every decision. Generations will reap what I sow. I can pass on a curse or a blessing to those I will never know." And she prays a blessing, says, "To my great-great-great-granddaughter, live in peace. To my great-great-great-grandson, live in peace." See, this is what influence is. And this is something, we don't need to be a politician in Washington, D.C. We don't need to be a celebrity in Hollywood. We don't need to be a missionary in some other part of the world. But that's the way we can have influence in where we live, in our homes, in our church, in our community, and in the relationships we have. Friendship leads to influence. Friendship sustains influence. Friendship is mutually beneficial, and it keeps us faithful. Jesus and Peter were friends. Peter denied Jesus, but it was the friendship of Jesus to Peter that sustained him, that helped restore him to become the pastor and the evangelist that he was. And Jesus said in John 15, verse 15, he said this to his disciples, which includes us. "No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you." Jesus calls us his friends, and he is that friend that sticks closer than a brother. And through him, we can have these relationships that will bless 1,000 generations. And because we're talking about eternity, much more than that. Would you pray with me, please? Pray that prayer that's from that song. Lord, remind us with every decision, generations will reap what we sow. We can pass on a curse or a blessing. We want to pass on a blessing, Lord. And in ways that we will never see while we're alive, but in eternity. And I pray you'll help us to see what we can do and where we are, who we are, with the people that you've brought in our lives, in our families, in our church community, and so forth. Lord, help us to be a hinge. Help us to be a reversal of curse in people's lives, bringing them a fresh start, that we ourselves have experienced it through your grace. In Jesus' name we pray.